Story 1. In 1995, Internet chat query, 14.4 kilobits per second modem, 32 megabytes random access memory, 200 megabytes hard drive, Pentium 5 processor, screen deeper than wide. At that time, it took 2 hours to download a low-quality audio song. Downloading a movie was just a science fiction fantasy. Story 2. In 1989 or 1990, during a computer literacy class in high school, we had an assignment to connect our school computer to the computer at the school board office. A classmate and I were the last to do this. At that time, the connection was made via the telephone, similar to the movie War Games. We dialed the number and heard the secretary at the school board office answer, saying, "Hello? It's those kids again." Story 3. A little with bulletin board systems in the late 1980s and a lot with Usenet and multi-user dungeons in the early 1990s, but the first experience with the World Wide Web was with my friends in late 1993 who had access to the Workstations laboratory and were excited to show me these things called home pages you could access through Mosaic version 1.0 and download pictures of Madoka from Kinetic Object Repository. Story 4. I was using web television back in 1996. I had used my Commodore 64 dial-up modem back in 1983 between my friends on an Atari and another Commodore 64. Story 5. Using dial-up to connect to the University of Minnesota and then using the Gopher system. Story 6. Prodigy in 1991 or 1992. It was at my friend's house, and we usually got kicked out of the message boards for swearing or other nonsense. I remember being amazed that we were chatting with actual people. It must have cost my friend's parents a fortune. We lost interest in it after a couple of months. I had an America Online account in 1993, and the college I attended issued email addresses around that time as well. My girlfriend, now my wife, bought me a 14.4 kbps modem in 1994, and I thought it was the pinnacle of speed and technology. I could download a picture she emailed me in about 3 minutes. Story 7. Getting my first email address with a bang path, know it symbol, over Unix to Unix copy program and access to Usenet via a local bulletin board system which had a connection to a local university. Late 1980s. Story 8. In the 1990s, I joined an online lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender local bulletin board called the Denver Exchange. It was my first social media experience and where I got my first email address. Story 9. I don't want to talk about it. Not what you think. Just never-ending dial-up, unsuccessfully trying to connect, only to connect and get booted right back off in 1994. Story 10. CompuServe got a disk from a mouth breather at Babbage's that changed my life. He also gave me access to his bulletin board system. Story 11. I ran a bulletin board system in 1992 and had been involved with OpusNet and bulletin board systems for a couple of years before that. Story 12. Commodore 64. Dialed into bulletin board systems in the late 1970s on my 300 baud modem, mostly looking for ways to copy games. Okay, maybe bulletin board systems were not technically the internet, but it was similar to ARPANET access I had when I got to college. Bulletin board systems, ARPANET, internet, whatever. Story 13. It was 1994 or 1995. My friend and I used to dial into local bulletin board system sites. The most popular one had internet access, but you had to have credits to use it. He spent $10 and bought some credits. The only website we knew was Blockbuster. It was just a bunch of ASCII text. I don't think you could do anything on the site. It was a complete waste of money. Story 14. Downloading Dragon Ball and Pokemon images on a floppy disk at my uncle's home, pretending to search for school materials. I later discovered that there is such a thing as browser history. Story 15. Getting an internet chat query account and connecting over dial-up on a 56K modem, which was completely unreliable if someone wanted to make a phone call. Also, waiting for several hours to download a picture with the resolution of a postage stamp. Story 16. In 1993, a 21-year-old searched for Star Wars on Webcrawler and suddenly realized they were not alone in the world anymore. Story 17. We had a computer class in elementary school, and in 3rd grade we had one unit on using a search engine. I used Yahooligans to look up monarch butterflies. Earlier than that, I watched my mom use the internet a little bit, mostly for instant messaging. Story 18. The first time I ever saw the internet was when my best friend typed big boobs into Yahoo. It was probably around 7th grade in 1997. Story 19. When my babysitter was creating an ABC Mouse account for me, she asked for my name, and I told her I could not remember it. Story 20. Has to be this for me. Story 21. Having random and awkward conversations in the StarCraft and Warcraft 3 Battle.net chat rooms. Story 22. Back in the mid-2000s, I vividly remember using a beige box. The video shows a black background with toys displayed one by one. There are no words, only a xylophone playing as background music. Story 23. I was 18, and it was my first time on the internet. I do not remember the site, but my girlfriend joined some sort of chat or forum. A man started hitting on her, and I responded to him. Story 24. My dad showed me how he was talking to someone who was in London. Couldn't wrap my head around it. I was under 10 years old. I think it was around 1996. Story 25. My older brother used our modem to connect to his friend's computer and access a text-based website. Story 26. I was homesick from school. I remember looking up Star Wars and finding a website where George Lucas was working on a new Star Wars movie. For $700, you could be part of a new scene with Yoda. I thought that sounded like a deal. Story 27. We have internet in the house. My parents ask me what I want to search for on the internet. I say, X-Men. We see unclothed men. Story 28. My parents brought home our first personal computer running Windows 98. My earliest memories include searching for things on Ask Jeeves and looking up websites in a book that listed suggestions of interesting sites. Story 29. Before Prodigy, I cannot remember the name. It was the CRT era. There was a dial-up internet portal that had about 5 of what we now call applications. I think there was a calendar, a news stream, chess, and maybe a text game. Story 30. My oldest memory of seeing the internet was 1996. Maybe. A friend of mine showed off his modem, and he logged into a chat room with fantasy decor. My first memory of using the internet was probably around 1998 or 1999, logging into Yahoo chat rooms with my neighbor who had internet access. We also visited websites we had heard about, and I wrote down in my notebook like The Sims, Scholastic, and White House. We learned from the last one that domain names are important because back then it was spelled incorrectly and led to inappropriate content. Story 31. I saw a commercial for a store that listed the website address, and it was pretty simple. I asked my dad to connect to the internet, and I entered the website address and waited a bit until the page loaded. It was a clothing store, I think. I just wanted to look at the clothes. This was the mid-1990s before search engines, so you had to know the actual website address to get anywhere. Story 32. My dad loved computers, and we had several color graphics adapter and video graphics array laptops when I was a kid, but never an enhanced graphics adapter. This must have been in the late 1980s. He hooked the video graphics array up to a monitor and found an internet service provider called Protégé. We played an online game the service offered that was a fantasy role-playing game where you explored a dungeon in first-person view, one slowly loading square box at a time. It was heaven. Story 33. In 2001, my parents got me my first personal computer. It had a 56K modem. I would beg for permission to use the internet, which would disconnect the phone line as a result. I remember forcing my dad to view some Pokemon websites with me that contained random facts about Pokemon. My first internet experiences were almost exclusively with Pokemon-related content. I was 9 years old that year, and the Pokemon craze was huge in Poland at the time. Story 34. Online games in the computer lab at school. If we aced a test, we got to play games during the review. Story 35. Using a 14.4 kilobits per second modem to connect to the Apogee Games bulletin board system. The first true internet experience was when Dad got CompuServe from work. Story 36. 1994. First day of 7th grade. I did not know how to read my schedule and ended up hanging out in the library. They had an internet-connected computer. and I sat there looking up bands until someone figured out where I was supposed to go. Story 37. Christmas Day 1995. MIRC with mother, father, brother aged 14, sister aged 16, and me aged 12 on Dalnet. That was an experience. Story 38. I don't remember the year, early 1990s or late 1980s. We just got a 128 kilobits per second modem. My dad got on the bulletin board system, which I had no idea what it was. I was a young child. My dad was talking to another person, but I don't know what about, who, or why. All I remember is our dog had recently passed, and I kept bugging him to share news about the loss. The computer screen was blue with white text. That's all I recall. Story 39. Probably an America Online trial disk I would have installed on my Tandy 1000HX in the late 1980s. I started my online journey at 300 baud. Story 40. In 1996, I used dial-up internet to play Quake. Later that year, I participated in the beta test for Ultima Online. I was one of the many players present when Lord British was assassinated due to a bug that made him vulnerable. Story 41. Late 1990s, around 8 or 9 years old. I went to my grandmother's house often because she had cable television and a phone line, while we did not. I was very interested in the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing and was searching about it on Yahoo. Story 42. My use of Sprint Telenet in 1987 relied on partial early web infrastructure. I wrote about it with a photo of a letter from Sprint a while back. My second earliest experience was college email in the fall of 1991. Story 43. Watching Daniel Middleton doing one of his earlier Let's Plays. Or maybe playing ABCYA in the school computer lab in first grade or kindergarten. Story 44. Extremely high-resolution photo of a fake nude image of Britney Spears, slowly loading line by line. It was very convincing and looked real. I mean, it was real, just not Britney Spears' body. Story 45. Going on the family iMac in 2012 when I was around 6 or 7 and playing games on it. It is crazy how fast we get old nowadays. Story 46. Dial-up modem and an America Online compact disc for 1 year of free America Online. Also free downloads of all my favorite music on Napster. Story 47, 1989, very early in the infancy of the World Wide Web. Local area networks were still using big cable or low-quality coaxial cable. I worked for an early vendor. Story 48, 1994. Chat rooms and my first email address. I still have it. My grandmother had America Online, so I was given an address. I feel attached to it even though it is not who I am, but I love having it. Story 49. Downloading adult content at 12 over 14.4 kilobits per second and being annoyed at how long it took, if it even finished downloading. Story 50. Local bulletin board systems or the World Wide Web. The web was emerging in 1995. I was on the newspaper staff at my college and we received a press kit for the movie hackers which included a link to a website. I went to the computer lab and asked to use the internet. I was introduced to Windows sockets and Netscape Navigator and I was hooked. Story 51. In 2010 or 2011, I saw someone using a computer to search for YouTube. It sparked my curiosity, so I checked it on the home computer at my place. Since then, I have continued to use YouTube. Story 52. Having an AOL Junior account as a kid and customizing it. I remember having my chat theme be outer space, and whenever I sent a message, it would make a funny alien speaking sound. My avatar was an animated Garfield, the cat that would emote when you said certain words or phrases. Being on those kid-friendly chat rooms was pretty cool. The moderators had tools to make pictures with characters. Listening to the AOL Junior radio was always a blast. But the best was instant messaging my late grandpa. I will always remember his username. Story 53. A class in school where we learned to type a full address, including all the symbols, letters, and numbers. Tedious. Story 54. I was 15 or 16, and that free trial America Online disc was the most exciting thing ever. My best friend and I would hang out in the chat rooms and try to talk to boys. Story 55. Man, I finally talked my grandmother into getting me a computer by 2001. Probably was the year, maybe 2000. It was so awesome and frustrating at the same time. My grandfather was always on the phone, so I could barely get online. Of course, when my cousins came over, Grandpa wanted to be cool, so we got to use the internet. Grandmother came into the bedroom at the wrong time. I was just happily watching television around 8 or 9 years old. My cousins, who were a few years older, were trying to play games, but unfortunately, pop-ups were rough back then. They got in a lot of trouble for a nude advertisement popping up on the screen, but it was not even their fault. Story 56. I was 4 years old in Qatar, sitting at the computer in the upstairs living room, and shouted to my mom, "How do you spell naked?" In a country where pornography was illegal, combined with a blanket blockage of as much explicit content as possible, I found it. I found breasts. Story 57. Using a search engine to find adult images. No videos back then. Slow dial-up internet. I can't remember the name of the main site for images at that time. Story 58. Looking for and binge-watching a bunch of dog training videos. Honestly, I don't know why. I didn't have or want a dog then. I just found it entertaining, I guess. Story 59. When I was a child, I was terrible at understanding internet user interfaces. I didn't know how to search or how to type. When I was very young, I learned how to play Angry Birds on my mom's phone. In one part of the game's menu, there was a link to the YouTube channel. Being a curious toddler, I clicked it and found a website filled with thousands of videos. I didn't realize YouTube was its own platform, so whenever I wanted to watch, I would go through the Angry Birds app. I think this was around 2009 to 2010. I never did anything other than click the same YouTube videos in a strange chain that led me from one to the next. Story 60. That must have been back in the 1990s. I do not remember when I used it for the first time. However, I do remember going to an internet cafe in France where I was on my term abroad, and they asked me whether I had used the internet before, essentially whether I knew what I was doing. Story 61. 6th grade. A Flash website that I don't think exists anymore. We were in a graphic design class. Some of the kids were playing a game called Spank the Monkey. You take a cursor of a hand and drag it across the screen to hit a balloon monkey, and that's a win. I didn't understand the joke, but everyone else did. I struggled with nuance. Then, on the same website, they found a song and music video called Gonads and Strife. It had a lot of images of chimps. I also didn't know what a gonad was. I was a naive kid. Story 62. Around 2006, I was 5 years old, and my friend told me to look up Naruto Barbie Girl anime music video. I laughed hysterically and rewatched it several times before showing all of my neighborhood friends. It was a simpler time. Story 63. Getting a Hotmail account so I could email my friends when I lived in Sweden for a year. Unfortunately, none of them had email addresses yet. Story 64. In 1993, in a server room at a university, a friend showed me how to send an email using a text console. I asked him how I would know it had worked, and his answer was, "How do you know a letter got delivered? You get an answer." Story 65. Downloading games via Kermit from the Joint Academic Network at university, circa 1989. It was very slow. My best early internet memory is watching pictures download from Mars via the National Aeronautics and Space Administration in real time as they were sent from the Sojourner rover. Story 66. My mom worked at J.C. Penney in corporate. She had gone in to do some kind of work over the weekend and brought us with her. Now that I think about it, I have no idea what she was doing. I think it was around 1993. My brother and I looked up video game cheat codes and Ed 209 using Lycos. Story 67. Downloading Discord when I was around 11 or 12. If we are talking about a computer in general, then probably when I was around 7 or 8. Story 68. In 1996, Australia, I sat in the primary school library listening to the dial-up tone. We would email a class in Poland as pen pals. Story 69. When I was 5 years old on my mother's computer, I was just on YouTube browsing the catalog of videos. It was truly an experience unlike any I had before, and from that moment on, I was constantly online. Story 70. AOL 3.0 chat rooms at my cousin's house. Everyone kept saying, instant message me, which I thought was everyone proudly proclaiming, I'm me, because instant message was not in my vocabulary yet. I still laugh about my surprise at how proud people were just being themselves. Story 71. AOL, when there was the dial tone whenever you picked up the home phone, so you could not talk on the phone until someone was no longer on the internet. I also remember when I got an AOL account, I decorated my homepage with a jungle theme. I would go on Cartoon Network website, Barbie website, and Neopets. Story 72. Being taught how to download inappropriate pictures via newsgroups from our sponsored college students staying with us. It took about 6 downloads and special software to decrypt and stitch the pictures together to get some images circa 1994. Story 73. I remember being on YouTube right as it started. I was 10 years old. There was not much on there at first, but it was still overwhelmingly awesome to my elementary school brain. Story 74. Connecting to America Online and listening to the modem ping as it valiantly tried to connect to the copper wire technology of the landline dialing system of the day, circa 1995. Story 75. Last day of school when I was 9 or 10 years old. There had been outside activities planned, but a rainstorm rolled in. We spent the entire day in the computer lab playing flash games. Story 76. Late 1980s. My employer at the time was one of the first dot-com companies. I used a bulletin board system from home and also occasionally from work for customer support because the internet was still a rarity. Story 77. In the mid-1990s at school, we had email pen pals on the other side of the world. This was before Microsoft Outlook. The Eudora email client was popular at the time. Story 78. I was about 9 years old stealing kills on Big Game Hunter 2. Other players cursed me out in chat. I laughed, but my father did not. I got kicked off the game that night. Story 79. I watched my friend's big brother play Ultima Online and was amazed. I had probably seen a lot of the internet before that, but that is the first thing I remember. Story 80. Microsoft Network Instant Messenger was used frequently before texting became popular. Homestar Runner was a popular web page. Chess and other card games were available via file transfer protocol at the time. Story 81. Emailing my aunt in early 1995 that my mother was pregnant. I was 11 and thought it was the coolest thing ever. Story 82. In 1997 or early 1998, using my aunt's Mac, she showed me Ask Jeeves. Back then, we had to type the entire web address. Story 83. Opening Internet Explorer, hearing the dial-up screech, and waiting 5 minutes just to search for cool dragon pictures. Worth it. Story 84. Specifically, my best friend got the internet and showed me the Meredith Brooks official chat room. It blew my mind that people could talk to each other in real time. We grew up in a very rural area and small town, so I'm sure by that point the internet had advanced a lot and we were just catching up. Story 85. Spring 1989 at college using one of my advisor's accounts was the first time. I do not believe it was publicly available at that point. Story 86. Badger, 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 mushroom, mushroom. Story 87. My stepbrother showed me a chat room and a couple of websites around 1995. I declared the internet to be disappointing rubbish that would never catch on. He went on to make millions in the first dot-com bubble. I have 75 pounds to last until payday. Story 88. Waiting about 10 minutes for the dial-up to connect, only for someone in the house to use the phone the moment I was connected. Story 89. In 1986, my friend's father was a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent. We would get on bulletin board systems. It was quite boring. In 1996, I got web television. Story 90. Me at about 7 years old, watching YouTube or Dailymotion on the personal computer, someone making a walkthrough on Mario Land 2. Story 91. My mum downloaded an electronic circus game onto her computer. I spent ages on it until it eventually stopped working. Story 92. Chatting with random people online with my cousins when we were around 10 years old. We absolutely should not have been doing that. Laugh out loud. Story 93. Waiting for the dial-up internet to connect and going to stickdeath.com waiting 5 to 10 minutes for a 3 to 5 minute video. Same with Nick.com, waiting 10 to 20 minutes for a flash game to upload and be ready to play. Those were the days, and we had the patience to wait. Unlike today, these kids complain about waiting. Story 94. In 1997, during a school exchange in Cheltenham, some wealthy students' parents had the internet. I visited chip.de because Chip was the most famous German computer magazine at the time, and I knew that .de is the German domain suffix. Story 95. Staying up all night on the new family computer in 1996 every night on America Online chat rooms and running up a £500 phone bill and being grounded forever. Story 96. Using Ask Jeeves, the family is amazing with the amount of knowledge and listening to the dial-up phone. Story 97. Not the earliest exactly, but I remember going to a university for a summer camp and they had much better internet than my dial-up at home. A friend and I downloaded a demo for a game called Crush, Kill, and Destroy, a real-time strategy game. We had to find several floppy disks to zip the install file and split it across multiple disks. It actually worked when we got home too. Story 98. Cell phones. One of my earliest memories related to the internet is actually about not using the internet. I remember how my mom instructed me not to click on the internet icon on my first Nokia phone when I was a child. Story 99. There was a Cartoon Network game called Grim and Evil, Battle Fortress. It featured spin-off characters from the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy. In the game, both you and your adversary would buy weapons and take turns shooting each other. Story 100. Email. My university had an internet connection via a Prime Super Mini computer and a lab full of dumb terminals. That would have been around 1992. Story 101. It is not great. I was peer pressured into looking at pornography by a friend who was the same age but a bit more mature in that way at the time. I remember this was the dial-up era, and he ran up my family's phone bill to the point that I spent a month doing chores to pay it off. We did not stay friends. Story 102. In 1995, I was a freshman in college with time to kill while waiting for my brother to finish class so we could carpool home. He taught me how to use text-based web browsers on the Unix terminals in the computer labs. Story 103. Downloading guitar tablatures from the online guitar archive at ftp.nevada.edu back in the mid-1990s on the computers in the university labs when I was a sophomore, and printing them out in the library to take home and learn to play. Home internet only became available for me about 3 or 4 years later, in 1999. Story 104. Well, it was not just my earliest memory, it was the first time I even heard about it. I was 30 years old. Someone explained that there was this new thing called electronic mail and our research center now had an electronic mail address. He took me to a computer at the end of the institute and showed me how to send an electronic mail message on a black and white screen. I sent a fax request and got an electronic mail address for a counterpart in France, and we sent him an electronic mail message. Basically, we said, "Hi, how's it going?" Just seeing how this electronic mail works. Then I asked, "What happens now?" He said, "We come back tomorrow or the day after and see if they replied." This was 1995. Story 105. In 2000, on my uncle's personal computer, I did not know anything. I remember looking around the house for anything that might have had a website address on it since I did not know how to search for something. There was a VHS of The Lion King with the website address www.disney.com on it. I stayed on that site for days. Story 106. My brother showed me a chat room type of setup he used with his amateur radio equipment. We used to have a large antenna on the roof for his radio gear. Story 107. Britney Spears. I will never forget looking up Britney Spears and seeing a spread eagle impersonator with her crotch exposed. All because of a typo. Story 108. Sneaking downstairs in the middle of the night to play Roblox because I was not allowed to. I do not know if that counts as the internet, but that is my earliest memory of interacting with other people online. Story 109. I was in 3rd grade, and we were each assigned a city in our state. We had to have 3 or 4 book sources, write to the mayor of the city we were assigned, and the only internet source we could use was the city's government website. Story 110. Circa 1999 to 2000, I had an old Pentium desktop. I used America Online to access the internet, where I would jump into random chat rooms and talk to people. I never lied about my age, as I was 8 or 9, and some weird people would proposition me. I ignored those and kept talking to people who did not do that. Eventually, my parents divorced and my mother took the computer, but my father got another one. We eventually got digital subscriber line internet, and I remember using the internet to look up information on Final Fantasy IX, since the strategy guide referenced using a website heavily to find more information. That really bothered me, to be honest. Story 111. My cousin showed me that you could search for images and printed a random anime image for me. Then my mom came in and asked what we were doing, followed by, "Oh, can you search for Backstreet Boys pictures? Because I liked them." I confidently replied that I did not think so, but my cousin promptly proved me wrong. He printed a Backstreet Boys picture for me too. The internet seemed so magical back then. Story 112. I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure I was looking up information on Star Wars in the early to mid-1990s. Story 113. My friend and I were browsing a website with Flash games and playing crudely drawn shooters and platformers on Newgrounds and the Flash game site with a shield as a logo. I think a couple of those Flash games also featured George Bush for some reason. Story 114. I used the Advanced Research Projects Agency network a little in college, but there was no World Wide Web yet. The first website I ever used was the James T. Kirk Singalong homepage. Story 115. I started using bulletin boards with a 1200/75 bits per second modem in the late 1980s. The actual internet as we know it probably began around 2004 on Netscape. Back then, we had to dial up a number, and it was all 8-bit graphics. Very slow. I had an acoustic coupler at one point, which connected straight to the telephone. It was like a jacket where you put the handset in. Those were the days I used a BBC Micro with 32 kilobytes or a Sinclair Spectrum with 48 kilobytes. Story 116. In 2011, my family told me to go to the local news site to look at the radar. I kept watching a video of a dog. It was on the news site and the dog was talking. I was obsessed with dogs when I was 5, especially the talking kind. After this, I mostly played Flash games during Flash's final years and watched Minecraft videos on YouTube. Story 117. Those little Google homepages before Google Chrome was available. 6-year-old me had an amazing homepage with virtual pets and minigames, all with a Lego Star Wars background. Story 118. My uncle was the first in the family to have the internet. They lived an hour away, so we did not go over there very often. My first experience with the internet was them looking up and printing out the lyrics to Yoda by Weird Al Yankovic for me. Story 119. The fall of 1995. A big box computer store had just opened in town. We were in the market for a new personal computer, so we decided to check it out. The store boasted the city's first internet cafe. Before every restaurant started offering free wireless internet cafes were places with a personal computer on every table for free public internet browsing while you ate. Naturally, we decided to have lunch at the internet cafe. I started typing in every random website I remembered from television commercials and news reports about the internet and thought it was pretty cool. I waved my dad over to show him the websites I found. Dad cautiously looked around to make sure Mom couldn't hear and then asked, "So, does Playboy have a website?" Within 10 minutes of my first trip through cyberspace, I was watching adult content with Dad. Story 120. At university around 1982, I did not even know what file transfer protocol and electronic mail were. I just took file transfer protocol and electronic mail for granted. There was no World Wide Web access there, but I got that at home in 1997. Story 121. Using MIRC in an internet cafe was fascinating because it allowed me to talk with people through chat during the early 1990s. Story 122. I used to drive 10 miles over to a friend's house on a Sunday afternoon and, after watching that week's Friends Season 1 episode on VHS, we would go on the internet using a 28,000 baud modem and an early Pentium personal computer. We would stay online for around an hour because here in the United Kingdom, one was charged by the minute for using the phone line. Most of that hour was spent looking up information on the Internet Movie Database, one of around 4 websites on the entire web at the time. Later, when I got my own internet connection and an America Online account, I hung out in music and movies chat rooms and made some genuine real-world friends. Then, in the 2000s, the people who had previously called US nerds discovered the web and things went downhill from there. But the 1990s were genuinely a pioneering time, it felt. Story 123. I was a complete nerd as a kid and still am. I was dialing into bulletin board systems at my cousin's house in the 1980s because his dad had a very early modem for work. It was an acoustic coupler like the one used in the movie War Games. This was what we had access to online before the public had access to the internet. I got access to the proper internet in 1994 via Siberia Cafe, Edinburgh's first internet cafe. Also, my mate's mom had an America Online account for work, so we used that too. Story 124. Around 1989, the librarian showed our class how she could send and receive electronic mail through the computer. Story 125. At around 7 years old, I downloaded a virus onto my phone because I was careless. I kept getting notifications 24/7, which were just pictures of nude women claiming to be interested. One time, my dad searched my phone, saw the pictures, and mistakenly thought I was gay. He got very upset, took the phone away for a day, and I cried, so he gave it back without removing the virus. The next time he searched my phone, he got angry again because he still thought I was gay. Story 126. Around 1991, Brainwash Laundry and Cafe had old tabletop video games converted into internet access points. It cost 25 cents for 15 minutes of use on the network. Story 127. A tech-savvy young friend brought me to the library to introduce me to the World Wide Web. She opened Alta Vista and encouraged me to search for anything. I decided to enter a challenging search. My favorite obscure independent band, Butthole Surfers. There were results, some concert reviews, blogs that mentioned them, and a rudimentary landing page with tour dates. I was impressed. Story 128. In 2013, somehow pirating the movie Frozen as a 5-year-old, I did not even understand the concept of pirating, and watching it to see if it was a boy or a girl movie. 5-year-old me had no logic. Story 129. TRS 80 color computer 2 with 16 kilobytes extended memory, 300 baud modem, long distance call to CompuServe. Mom was upset about the 52-minute call. I wish I could remember how much it cost. Story 130. My cousin and I were watching a strange dry humping video. We thought it was funnier than anything. Story 131. I was 9 and in a chat room. A boy in England asked me, "How big are your breasts?" That's pretty much the internet right there. Story 132. Trying to connect for the first time and it is not working. To be fair, I lived in a town of 12,000 in rural Missouri and the person who ran that internet company was dishonest. We had many days when we could not even connect because the server was full. No refunds and no apology. Story 133. Late March, early April 1992. I was 12 years old, and my friend was telling me about a man in Philadelphia who was arrested for paying boys for sex, collecting their dirty underwear, and other disturbing activities. I couldn't believe it, so he said, "Come to the computer, and you can read the article." Halfway through reading, I asked, "Did you copy this from the newspaper to your computer?" He said, "No, it's Prodigy." I replied, "What is Prodigy?" Story 134. Trying to play 2006 RuneScape in 2007 with America Online dial-up. I was probably 12, but that was my life for a few months. Story 135. OnChat was an avatar-based chat room with different areas. I remember begging my mom and dad for a paid account when it stopped being free, but they refused. Story 136. My second grade classroom had 3 Macintosh computers, the turquoise ones. Oregon Trail felt different on those. Story 137. It was the mid-1980s. I was in college and found out how to get email digests through an internet email gateway. While the computer system where my account was located was not on the internet, it was on BITnet. You could send messages to internet email addresses through the gateway. It worked like this. I went to the University of Iowa, so my user account took the form of cstxyz at uiamvs.bitnet, where CST indicated a student account on the mini computer we called Prime C, and UIA-MVS was our MVS running IBM mainframe. I could send email to other BITnet addresses from there. Suppose the email address for the list I wanted to subscribe to was somelistel@site.edu, a normal internet address. You could send commands to such an address to subscribe yourself to the list, change whether you received messages as posted to the list, or receive a digest every week of what had been posted. To send an email to the internet address from BITnet, we would send to this address, somelistel%site.edu@cunivm.bitnet. I do not recall the exact name, but it was something like that, and it allowed you to get out. Of course, I had to provide my email address to internet systems as cstxyz%yams.bitnet@cunivm.cunit.edu. Remember, this was before the World Wide Web. After a while, we switched to systems that were directly on the internet instead of BITnet, so we were able to use Usenet newsgroups and anonymous FTP sites. Story 138. Albino Black Sheep and Addicting Games are two standout websites. Notable games include The Demented Cartoon Movie and Interactive Buddy. Story 139. I am not sure the details are exact, but I know in the early 1990s we had an Intel 80286 and then an Intel 80386 computer. My father had just bought a modem for the house and was testing it by messaging one of the other computer teachers who was a family friend. Looking back, it was probably via internet relay chat. I was in the room and he was very excited. He asked me if I wanted to say hi, so he let me type to him for a little while. It is a pretty cool memory. Story 140. In the mid-2000s, I watched my brother use the Pivot Animator application. Watching him create all these really cool animations as a kid was impressive. He used to upload them to YouTube. Story 141. In 2001, my friend went to a website that was his generic name, and it was a pornographic website. After that, I did not use the internet again until 2005 for MySpace and other social media sites. Story 142. I remember my last day at college and packing to move in December 1993. One of my roommates was explaining the World Wide Web to me. I was rolling my eyes and could not understand what he was talking about. Story 143. Dialing into some university with my modem using a borrowed account. Then from there FTPing to some server in Finland, downloading guitar tabs and Dungeons and Dragons adventures. Now get off my lawn. Story 144. A man at the computer store where I worked showed me how to find adult content. I had never seen such explicit material. I had to relieve myself in the bathroom and almost did again on the bus home. Story 145. Local dial-up message board. I was 12 or 13, and there was a section for games. One game was for adults. I don't remember most of it. It was something like running around town doing risky sexual and drug-related activities. You would come across a prostitute, and it would ask if you wanted to use protection. If you said no, you got more points. If you caught a sexually transmitted disease, it was game over. It was super lame, but it was the beginning of online adult content. Story 146. In 1987, some bulletin boards had direct connections via a modem. Then in 1989, we got Prodigy Online. It required a very expensive color monitor, but there were barely any graphics. Mostly everything was just text. You could look up news, weather, sports scores, and more from anywhere. I don't remember using it much. America Online in the early 1990s, then by 1996, I got my first apartment and immediately got digital subscriber line. I upgraded as soon as better service was available wherever I lived. Story 147. I first dialed into a mainframe in 1985 in graduate school. This was not really the internet yet. I also dialed into local bulletin boards. Everything was command line using a protocol called Telnet. I downloaded files using Kermit. This was before file transfer protocol was widely deployed. My first modem was 1,200 bits per second. I was an early user of electronic mail and got an electronic mail address in maybe 1991 or 1992. I dialed into the server that hosted my electronic mail over my copper twisted pair phone line and connected using Telnet. I then read and sent electronic mail using the Unix command line mail and 6-text editor. I updated my modem to 9,600 bits per second. I also discovered the Archie internet search engine around the same time. Archie was a command line search engine but very powerful for its day. This was the beginning of the internet as we think of it today, as you could search for information. I remember being blown away the first time that I saw Mosaic and the World Wide Web in 1995 at a technology demonstration. Mosaic is still around today inside the Firefox web browser. Story 148. Trying to get game codes in a Sega chat room only to be bombarded with sexual predators trying to get a glimpse of my body. Story 149. My school got a computer when I was in 8th grade in the early 1980s. We thought it was so cool to have our names scroll down the screen. Story 150. I was indirectly connected to the internet for a few years. I had access to a bulletin board system via phone lines, which allowed sending and receiving email to the internet, but not direct connections such as the World Wide Web. After some time, I got dial-up internet and searched for images of Cindy Crawford. Story 151. Internet relay chat, Microsoft Network, search engines before Google, web crawler or Yahoo, peer-to-peer networks, bulletin boards with questionable films on them. Story 152. In 1995, we got a gateway desktop and my dad's best friend had America Online. He came over and showed us how it worked. I remember the little America Online home screen with about 8 different buttons to click on for various things like games, kids, and news. Story 153. Accessing user network from because Internet Technology Network using an application system 400. Browsing Gopher servers. Downloading cool content from Indiana University. Story 154. We had a communal family desktop when I was young. Friends at school were talking about how cool this YouTube thing was and how you could watch all kinds of videos. So I got home and typed in what I thought they were talking about. YouTube. I don't know about now, but back then, YouTube was apparently a pornography site. That was a shock for my young brain. I panicked because I knew something was wrong, so I just closed it and ran away. Later that week, I heard my parents arguing about why pornography was coming up when typing the letter U in the URL. I cried. Story 155. My friend and I in high school would always catfish guys on internet relay chat, pretending to be attractive girls looking to party. We would convince them to come to one of my friend's neighbors' houses so we could watch from the window as they arrived and knocked on the door, only to find out that no girls were there wanting to party. That was literally one of the first things I did on the internet when it became available. Story 156. In the early 1990s, I had a FidoNet point. I could email my girlfriend at her university and have the message arrive in 2 or 3 days. The funny part was her university was less than a mile from where I lived. Story 157. When I had my first real laptop, an HP Omnibook 600 along with a Ricochet wireless modem, I was living in the Bay Area in California. I quickly adapted to using ICQ to connect with people all over the world. Story 158. 28.8 thousand modem. Phone engaged. Mother telling me to get off the internet so she could make a phone call. Good times. Story 159. 4,800 baud modem. Logging into Delphi and going, okay, now what? Also dialing into some local bulletin board systems and playing food fight against strangers. Also being amazed that I could log into the local library and see their book lists. Simpler times. Story 160. Out for the night. Do not call until after 9 p.m. when my minutes are free. Realize, real lies. Story 161. It may not be the absolute earliest, but I remember winning a school competition to design artwork for a website teaching children about World War I, or remembrance related to it. I was one of a group of winners and was filmed for a local news story. When I logged in, my art looked badly uploaded and pixelated. This was around 1997 or 1998, and I would have been 7 or 8 years old. Story 162. Wow, that's a tough one. 300 baud dial connection. No web browser because this was before Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which Netscape introduced. We used File Transfer Protocol and Gopher. When? Maybe 1992. It was lots of fun back in those days because security was poor and without too much effort you could log into government departments and browse around. Story 163, YouTube had just come out, and there were creepy SpongeBob videos that looked like they were made on Microsoft Paint. Story 164. I remember my friend telling me about web pages my sophomore year in high school, and I was like, so, a bulletin board system, right? Story 165. Hard shutting down the tower because I hear my father walking in the house and the screen is frozen because of the spam that always accompanies inappropriate pictures. It would regenerate faster than I could close them. Story 166. I was 12 at my cousin's house. They had a family computer. I didn't know what the internet was. They opened Google and asked me to search for anything. I was shocked. I ran back to my house excited, telling my siblings what I had just seen. Story 167. Setting up Windows for Workgroups version 3.11 to connect to the internet, browsing to AltaVista for web searching, and using Internet Relay Chat. Story 168. Well, I don't really have much of a memory of the internet at all. I grew up with dial-up, and my mom never got off the phone. I was stuck playing Freddy Fish or Destroy, a game where you can massively destroy your user interface. It was amazing. Story 169. PSHHHHKKKKKKRRR caking TSH ding ding ding. Why did you make me relive that sound? Haha. Story 170. Watching Winx Club when I was 6 years old in 2015 on my mother's laptop. Once, I accidentally got a virus while trying to watch it on a website, but thankfully my father was able to stop it. Story 171. I remember my dad getting a computer, and we were amazed that it had a 1 gigabyte hard drive. I said, "We will never fill that up." Story 172. Age, sex, location, MySpace custom profile designs, top 5 friends, Microsoft Network, Omegle, old school Wikipedia and YouTube, LimeWire viruses, Stardoll. Story 173. Using an America Online free trial disk after getting out a 28.8 modem. Then I tried to load the website for the film That Thing You Do, and it took 30 minutes. Then my mom had to use the phone. Story 174. Literally the first time on the internet. I opened a web page in class in high school and, thinking nothing would happen, I went to a website with explicit content. Suddenly, large images appeared on the screen, and I closed it as fast as I could. I cannot remember her face, though. Story 175. In the high school computer lab on some Mac computers, we were actually being taught how to configure a working internet connection, which was unusual for a small-town high school. I learned about Archie, Gopher, Trumpet, and Windows sockets, probably more than that. This would have been on the old-school original Netscape Navigator. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.